Hey, y'all. Let me get started on Instagram as well. Excellent, excellent. So I am now live on Instagram and YouTube. Thank you all so much for tuning in live. I don't like to do like the whole waiting around for people to join because the replay is always available. But thank you so much for joining. My name is Coach Shantae Wilkerson, and I am here representing the Emerald Green Collective on our Build Through broadcast. Today, I'm going to be talking about a subject that is very near and dear to me, which is gardening. Gardening is a practice that can be used for healing and sustainability. And as we move forward as a collective, there are a myriad of things that I'm sure that we all need to heal and work through. And we most certainly can use the savings from growing our own produce and such. So without further ado, we are going to go ahead and dive into today's subject. All right. Once again, Coach Shantae reporting live, and I am actually in Alabama. And Alabama is a lot of things, but one of the things that is great about Alabama is that we have a long planting season. So generally, the knowledge is that you plant your crops outdoors after the first frost. But the reason that I wanted to choose this subject for today is if you are in an area that has a long growing season, this is a great time to go ahead and get your seeds into the soil for the spring so that once the last frost has passed, you can start hardening off your seedlings and get them out in the soil so that they can get going and be ready to go in the springtime. So I went ahead and got my some of my seeds started for my 2023 spring garden, and I did that on the new moon. Now, there's a lot of knowledge and wisdom when it comes to using the moon cycles for planting, and I'll be sharing some resources for that as well later on in the broadcast. But you can use the moon phases to determine what to plant and when to plant it. Okay, so you can plan out your garden, plan out if you want to do an in-bed garden, if you want to do raised bed gardens, if you want to do a combination of both, if you want to have plants indoors and outdoors, if you want to do aquaponics or a aeroponic garden, because there are so many options available. So just look into the gardening opportunities and see which one most resonates with you. Okay. Now, let's talk about healing specifically. So, for me, healing is what got me fully invested in gardening. I had tried many times to start a garden and to have a successful gardening experience. And each and every time it was a failure. I felt like I could not grow anything. And I had started to believe that I couldn't even care for aloe because I had killed like 2 or 3 aloe plants. And in 2018, 2018 was a rough year. And I think I've mentioned that quite a few times on various broadcasts. Like 2018 was truly a rough year, from, relationship issues to, losing my bonus dad and the way that, we lost him and everything that transpired afterwards. Like, it really took so much out of me. Like, I was just so broken going into 2019. And I remember just being in this low, dark place. And there was a veteran who was outside of the Goodwill thrift store in Dothan. That's where I'm from. I'm a native of Dothan, Alabama. And he was selling tomato plants for $1. I can't remember what type of tomato plants they were. But I took those tomato plants home and I planted them, and they didn't do great. Then the reason that they didn't do great is because I put them in an old cooler similar to the one off to my side over here. And I put soil in it. I put the tomatoes in it. And I was like, all right, these tomatoes are going to grow. Now, they did grow. They did do all right. They did get tomato fruit on them, but they died. I found out that the reason that they died is because they weren't getting enough air and there was too much water in the container. Anytime that you plant, oh, this is gardening tip or one of my gardening tips. I'm not going to count it because I will lose count. Always make sure every single time that you grow something in a planter or in a raised bed that your soil and your plants are able to get air and have drainage. So you need airflow and drainage holes. Those two things are extremely important. If you do not have airflow and drainage holes, you will waterlog your plants, and the soil will not stay aerated enough for the roots to get what they need. And then it causes a lot of problems. So make sure that you have drainage holes and aeration in your planters and in your raised beds. All right. So the next thing that I grew, I hadn't realized that was the issue with the first one. So I started my first garden. I was doing a raised bed or container garden, and I just used some, what are those things? Some Rubbermaid totes. I had a bunch of Rubbermaid totes from moving into the house that I was living in at the time. So oh, wait, I lied. I had figured out that was the issue with the first set of plants. So I did make sure that I drilled a bunch of holes down in the bottom of each of these totes. And then I filled them up with soil and I started planting my plants. So I had raised bed or the totes that had the holes in the bottom. I also went to the Dollar Tree and I got some planters from the Dollar Tree and I think Lowe's, and drilled the holes in the bottom of those. So tip number 2, that garden was a success because everything grew and I was able to harvest from that garden, but I had entirely too many plants in each of my planters. Plants need a lot of room for their roots to grow. Plants need a lot of room for their roots to grow. So if you have your plants crowded, they're not going to do well, because all of them will be competing for nutrients in the soil and space for the roots to grow out. Some of the plants that require the most room for the roots are tomatoes and watermelon. Okay, tomatoes and watermelon require a lot of room for their roots. Watermelon specifically is what's known as a heavy feeder. So you have to have really nutrient dense soil, and then you have to make sure that it stays watered in very well and that you have a really quality fertilizer. Okay. Now, if you have chickens, like if you're farming and you have chickens, or if you have bunny rabbits, of course, cows and horses and all of that kind of stuff, you can use their waste, their poop in your garden and till that into the soil or mix it in or however you do it. And that's a really great source of fertilizer for your garden. Now, the best, like absolute best fertilizer that I have ever heard of or seen or used personally for a garden is rabbit poop. Rabbit poop is the absolute best fertilizer for your garden. It doesn't burn the plants like chicken poop does. Like, you don't have to let it sit for a while or try to turn it into a tea or do anything extra with it. Like, you can literally take the bedding from your bunny cage and dump it directly into your compost bin or directly into whichever raised bed or wherever you're going to be using it. It's just boop, boop, 1-to-1. You don't have to do anything extra. Like, it is exceptional. And the plants that grew from it, I had a cherry tomato plant that grew from the rabbit poop in my compost bin, and it did really, really, really well. That was the biggest cherry tomato plant that I have ever grown. And it was not even grown on purpose. It just sprouted up from a seed that was near the compost bin or that had gotten dropped in the compost bin, and it just flourished. I'm 5 feet tall, and it was as tall as me, and it was lush and green and full of cherry tomatoes for several months. Like the other cherry tomatoes that I grew did not do anywhere near as well as that. Then I had some watermelon that I grew from that area. And the watermelon would have done much better if I had made sure to keep it watered in. It needs a lot of water, but it did really well. The watermelon that I was able to grow were really sweet. They were so good. So I'm definitely looking forward to getting some watermelon in the soil this year. Want to see how good they'll grow and how well I can keep them going so that I can get a bunch of them. Because last year I went through several cycles of just eating watermelon, like all day long, just eating watermelon. So I want to do that again this year, do a bunch of watermelon and salads and avocados over, however long. I may do that for my annual fast, which is a conversation for another day. Couple more tips and then we're going to move on. So that was the fertilizer. So my second year garden, I planted the things too close, and that was an issue that I faced that year. So in my third year, so that's 2019 garden, 2020 garden, 2021, I didn't garden quite as much in 2021. 2021, I was really blossoming and transitioning from a lot of the hurt that I had experienced. So I wasn't out in my garden quite as much as I was in those first 2 years. But I do still have my garden, and I am making plans now to get some things into the soil just for sustainability and just continue healing, because there's always something that's going to come up. But another one of the tips that I want to leave you with is, do not ever assume that simply because you didn't do well at it a couple of times that you're no good at it. You may need some knowledge. You may need some insight. Our ancestors grew a lot of things, and not just from working on plantations, but from being on the continent of Africa, wherever your ancestors may have traveled from, whether they were indigenous to Africa or indigenous to the Americas. We all are from people who grew their food because that's what you had to do. So it is in you, it is innate in your DNA and in your blood to be able to do that. We just have to tap back into that knowledge and allow ourselves to cultivate that aspect of ourselves. So like I said, some of the things that I planted: tomatoes, okra, corn, several different types of flowers to attract the pollinators to the garden, because you definitely need those. Kale, Swiss chard, which Swiss chard is one of my absolute favorite things to go grow. Collard greens, kale. What else did I have? Avocados. I grew a lot of avocados, or started a lot of avocado seeds. Not all of them made it. I don't think any of my original avocado seeds have made it. So that's a subject for another day. Peach. I have a couple of peach trees that are growing, a couple of grapefruit trees that are growing, a couple of lemon trees that are growing. Blueberries. Oh, my blueberries bushes. I'm so excited about those. Definitely looking forward to transplanting those this year so they can have a bit more space. And I want to see how well they do in a bigger pot. French marigolds is one of my favorite things to. I'm looking at the garden out. One of French marigolds is another one of my favorite things to grow. Bell peppers are another one of my favorite things to grow. Moringa, oregano, thyme, parsley, basil. Pretty much anything that you use on a regular basis, try your hand at growing it. There's something so beautiful about using your your own produce and things in your food. So this year, I was doing my vegan meal prep. And before the frost came through, I was able to go out and pick lettuce from my garden, and that's what I was serving along with my entree. So every entree came with, the entree, a side or two, and then a side salad. And I was able to pull from my garden for my side salad, my lettuce, and tomatoes until, like I said, the frost came through and I didn't cover everything up. So I lost those crops. So that's another tip. Keep an eye on the weather, especially when it is getting close to the winter season. Because if it freezes, if the ground freezes, it will kill off most of your plants. This year, I was able to save one plant, which I was really excited about, or one plant that I was really mindful that I wanted to save was my elderberry plant. A friend, colleague, associate gifted me with an elderberry plant last year, and it is doing really well. It's been in the house because although it is hardy, which means that it can overwinter, I did not want to chance it being outside in the cold and getting frozen and dying like some of the other plants did. So I brought it in the house. And I'm looking at my notes here to make sure I covered everything. So gardening as a healing practice, I healed and transmuted a lot of things, grew a lot more than just produce, a lot more than just flowers. It was truly a transformative experience. I was able to release a lot of grief, a lot of trauma from my body and from my mind and spirit with my gardening experience. And now I'm looking forward to moving into the next phase of my gardening life, which is sustainability. I want to be able to eat off of my garden year round. And I got really close this year because I actually did have things growing in the wintertime. I just didn't keep my eye on the weather and make sure to cover up my plants when the frost came through, because I could have still continued to eat off of that after the frost if I had covered everything up and made sure that it was not going to get super, super cold. Okay. So let's talk sustainability. So sustainability, you want to be able to grow your garden year round, whether you are growing in a large space or if you're growing in an apartment or some other small area. You want to be able to grow year round if you are gardening for food and sustainability. If you're growing in a small area, these are a couple of tips that you can use. If you have like a small apartment, if you have a balcony or a patio, you can use round containers. I wouldn't get anything that is smaller than like a 10-gallon container or anything that's smaller than, I want to say a 12 to 18 inch circumference, and 10 to 12 inches of depth. You want to have some pretty big planters. Now, you may not be able to grow a lot in that space, but one plant per planter or one plant per 5-gallon bucket. I did say no less than 10, but a 5-gallon bucket, those do really, really well if you're in a small space. You can get a 5-gallon bucket, drill some holes in the bottom, fill it with soil, and that is a really good planter option. And you can plant in small spaces with that. If you are willing to and interested in investing, you can get an aquaponics system or hydroponic system, or you can get an aeroponic system. And those are you can just, it's like a tower. You can sit it in one spot near a window, keep it watered. Not keep it watered. The aeroponic and the hydroponic, those are like a tower, but you don't need to do any watering with those. Those systems are kind of self-contained. You just want to make sure, like with the hydroponic or aquaponics, that you keep the fertilizer in the water so that the system can continue to grow the roots and nourish the plants. I haven't learned a lot about the aeroponic system, but I imagine it to be the same. But if that's something that interests you, definitely look into that. Now, another option you have is an actual tower garden. This is the traditional soil type garden, but it's a tower. So the pots are stacked on top of one another in a tower form. So you can sit that in one spot in a sunny area and just make sure everything is fertilized and everything is watered in. Now, when you utilize those systems, especially if you're utilizing them inside, you will need to manually pollinate your plants when the time comes so that you can get your produce. Plants like squash, watermelon, and squash is another thing that I grow, which is a challenge most years because of the squash vine borers. They're a menace, a true menace. But those are plants that have male and female flowers. So as they grow, usually I'll notice the male flowers grow in first, and then the female flowers grow in afterwards. The female flowers, you can, if you look close, like right at the bottom, like where the actual flower connects to the plant, instead of the flower and the stem coming together, there's a little bulb in between. That's the fruit. So it'll be the watermelon or the squash, and you can tell because it'll be shaped like a miniature version of whatever that plant is supposed to grow. So you'll have like a tiny little miniature baby watermelon, a little tiny miniature baby zucchini, little tiny baby miniature squash, so on and so forth. And you can take a Q-tip and rub inside of the squash flower and then rub inside of the female squash flower. And that way you can pollinate what is meant to be pollinated. Cucumbers is another thing that I love to plant, and they also have the same kind of system. So if you grow those inside, you'll want to use the toothpick or Q-tip to get the pollen from the male plant and put it inside of the female plant so that it can be fertilized. All right. Another great thing that you can do to save space or just to encourage your plants to grow properly and fully is companion planting. Companion planting is the process of putting complementary plants together. There's one combination, and I cannot, for whatever reason, I just drew a blank. So I'll try to circle back to that at a later time. But companion planting is essentially you look and see what plants grow well together. So let me do a quick search. So if you're looking for some companion planting options, of course, Google has a lot of stuff. So let's say you were looking for something to plant with tomatoes. So I just did a quick search. For companion plants for tomatoes. And some of the things that came up are marigolds, garlic, onions, lavender, basil, etc. Now, the best thing about this is like it simplifies what to plant with tomatoes, but you don't want to plant more than, I would say, 2 companion plants with the tomatoes, because the more companion plants you add to tomatoes, you have to also search and make sure that the companions of the tomato plant are good to grow together. Garlic is not good to grow with everything. It can throw things off on occasion. So you want to make sure that if you decide to grow your garlic with your tomatoes, that if you put something else in the planter, it doesn't interfere with that particular plant. Okay, so now we are to the part of our broadcast where we talk about resources. So when I first started gardening, I did not have like a lot of know-how. Like I didn't know exactly what I needed to do. There was a lot of trial and error. I didn't have the opportunity to eat off of my garden as much as I wanted to, because my plants, while they were growing, I didn't quite know how to care for them. So, you know, there is a learning curve that you will have to face, but you're going to do fine. You will be, you know, great. You're going to use some of these resources that I'm going to share with you, and they are going to help you to transcend all of the things that I experienced when I started my gardening journey. So one of the resources that I want to share with you is an app that you can get on the Google Store or the App Store. Excuse me. And it is called Seed to Spoon. That's Seed to Spoon. Seed, T-O, spoon. Not the number 2, but the word 2. Seed to Spoon. You can put all the plants that you want to grow in there. And once you pull it up and start putting in the plants that you have in your garden, you can click a tab that says companions, and it'll show you like the friends of that plant and the enemies of that plant. You can put in when you planted the particular seed, if you started it from seed, and it'll tell you an estimated harvest date for when that should be ready. Like it is a very, very useful app. I absolutely love it. I use it every single year and I recommend it to everyone. I have built a few gardens over the years in Alabama. And I always recommend to my new garden owners, download the Seed to Spoon app. It will simplify so much for you and take a lot of the guesswork out of things, because I like to give people the tools and the resources that they need to grow and build and sustain what it is that they desire. I don't necessarily want to be, taking care of the garden or any of those types of things. Like I really like to help people get to a place of being self-sufficient. So the Seed to Spoon app is really amazing. Definitely download and install that. Another resource is the Old Farmer's Almanac. So you can actually get a physical copy of the Farmer's Almanac from pretty much anywhere: Walmart, Publix, Target, Lowe's, Home Depot, Tractor Supply Company, Ace Hardware. Like wherever you go to get your gardening supplies, the Almanac is available. The Almanac also has a website, which is almanac.com. That's ALMANAC.com, almanac.com. When you go to the Almanac website, there's going to be a pop-up, and it's going to say free guide, how to start a vegetable garden. That is an amazing resource that you can have access to. You can have that emailed to you. You can print it out. You can use it online. It's a really great resource to kind of help you understand what it is that you're going to be doing, what you're going to be looking for. And it will definitely give you a lot of really great information. So Seed to Spoon app and the Old Farmer's Almanac, physical or digital copy. And then the next thing is going to be some books. So I left several of the books on the bookshelf, but some of the books that I recommend are Farming While Black. There is a section in this book that talks about the moon cycles. Let's see if I can get to it rather quickly. No, I didn't. I didn't mark the page. But the author of this book is where I learned about planting with the cycles of the moon. So you can definitely use this book, Farming While Black by Leah Penniman, to help inform your gardening journey. And then Working the Roots by Michelle Lee. This one is more of a reference guide. This book has a lot of interviews with various people who are like old school knowledge about how to grow plants and all kinds of things. Like this book is an amazing resource, Working the Roots. So these two, Working the Roots and Farming While Black, those are two books that I highly recommend that you add, especially if you are new to gardening. You can check and see if your library has these books, or you can order them from Amazon or any Black bookseller. And there'll be a lot of really great information in those books to help you make it through your gardening journey. And of course, like I said, I do not mind, I like to be a resource to help people get to a place of sustainability. So if you're interested in more information about gardening, feel free to send an email to tegcollective9@gmail.com. That's tegcollective9@gmail.com, subject gardening. And I will be sure to respond. I can send you to whatever resources you need. If you're interested in a holistic wellness consultation with myself or any of my colleagues here at the Emerald Green Collective, we would absolutely love to help you reach your health and wellness goals, even and especially if they include creating your own healing garden space. I wanted to share some pictures of my garden, but I couldn't get the technology logistics to work together. So if you follow us on Instagram, be sure to check. I'll post a few photos of my garden throughout the years on Instagram. If you're on Instagram and you want to see the rest of our Build Through broadcast, you can scroll back on Instagram and look through the post, or you can head over to our YouTube channel, Teg Collective TV, and view all of our past broadcast sessions there. Thank you all so much for tuning in. It has truly been my pleasure to talk to you today about about gardening as a healing and sustainability practice. I truly appreciate your time and your energy, and you all have a splendid rest of your day. We are going to close it on out the same way we brought it in, Emerald Green Collective style. All right.